Alright, here's the review for CA2. This will be the first 10 questions on your Chapter 2 test on Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, on number 1, if you notice, it's just a pattern. If there's one term, we know the answer is 1, which is 1 squared. 3 terms, the answer is 9, which is really 3 squared. And if there's 5 terms, the answer is 25, which is really 5 squared. So the pattern here is basically the number of terms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, squared. So if we're trying to find the 16, then we know the answer is going to be 16 squared, which is D. And so as you're doing that one, that's all you want to think about. Find the pattern and then use that pattern to predict the next one. Now on question 2, this one gets a little confusing at the beginning just because of the way we set it up, and I apologize for that. Basically what we're looking for here is there is your T-chart. So statement A is actually your statements, and then B is reasons. So that's like the beginning of your T-chart. And then C is where we actually start our proof. So we have our 4 times x minus 20 equals 2x plus 10, and that's given. Next we want to distribute the 4. And so when we distribute the 4, the reason for that is obviously distributive property of equality. And then from there we want to subtract 2x from both sides. And so that'll give me 2x minus 80 equals 10. And we got that by subtracting. So that would be the subtraction property of equality. Next we want to add 80 to both sides to isolate x. So that gives me 2x equals 90. And again we added, so that would be the addition property of equality. And then finally we're going to divide both sides by 2 to get x equals 45, and that would be the division property of equality. And so on your proofs, that's what you want to do there. Now for number 3, this is just a logic statement here, and you have to figure out which one's true and false. Now the key here is to notice that it is a biconditional if and only if. So it has to work forwards, it has to work backwards. So if an animal carries its young in a pouch, then it is a marsupial. And then also, if it's a marsupial, then it carries its young in a pouch. So question 1 or statement 1 is true because it says the same thing the statement says. An animal is a marsupial, it carries young in its pouch. Now, step 2, if an animal is a marsupial, then if an animal is not a marsupial, then it does not carry its young in a pouch. That is also true. Then statement 3, if it does not carry its young in a pouch, then it's not a marsupial. Again, that is true. And then finally, statement 4 is false. The first part is okay, but the second part says nothing about it having to be a female. It could be male or female, so that makes that one false. It could be either one. Now, on number 4, it says which of them is false. Now, in this particular example, just make counterexamples to see what you can find. Now, first of all, A is false because the difference of 2 odd numbers is always positive. Well, if I subtract 5 minus 1, I get 4. That's true. But if I do 1 minus 5, I get negative 4. That is not positive, so that is a counterexample. B and C are both true, but again, D is also false. The product of 2 even numbers is odd. Well, if we do 2 times 6 is 12, well, that right there is even, so that is not a true statement. Okay, so A and D are your false ones. That's where your counterexample goes. Okay, number 5. On number 5, what I would suggest you do on this one is put an X in the ones that can't be right and put a check mark in the ones that are. So right away it says that Art weighs more than Dave, so you know Art has to be heavier than Dave. And it says Sarah weighs 20 pounds more than Dave. And then Marla weighs more than Art. Okay, so basically as we go through, it's just a matter of figuring out which one is which so that you can answer the questions. And again, just put an X where they don't belong and a check mark where they do belong. And what you're going to end up happening is you're going to find out that Dave is the lightest, and if he's the lightest, then we know that Sarah weighs 20 pounds more than Dave, so Sarah has to be at 100. And then Sarah weighs less than Maria, or than Marla rather, so Marla has to be here, which leaves only the 90 for Art to be. Okay, and so here from lowest to highest would be Dave, Art, Sarah, Marla. Okay, moving on to number 6. 5 points lie in a plane, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the correct answer is B. 5 points makes 10 lines. Okay. Number 7, define the word valid. That basically means written in a legal way, in a truthful way. A statement that is valid is true. That is not true. Sometimes just because it's written correctly doesn't mean it's true. A statement that is not valid is true. That again is false. It doesn't have to be valid to be true. It doesn't have to be not valid to be false. And then the midpoint of AB, again, to find the midpoint, we're going to add the x's. 4 plus negative 1 is 4 plus negative 1 is 3, divided by 2 is 1.5. And then negative 3 plus 3 is 0, divided by 2 is 0. So the midpoint is 1.5, comma 0. Now the distance, that's where we use Pythagorean theorem. So on this one, you would want to draw the graph. So you would draw this 4, negative 3, and then negative 1, positive 3. And now we form our triangle, come straight down, straight across to form a right angle. Now from here we went from 3 to negative 3, so we went 6 units. And from here we went to negative 1, 4, so we went 5 units. So then we would say 5 squared plus 6 squared equals c squared. So then 25 plus 36 equals c squared. And so then when you add those together, you'll get 61 equals c squared. And then don't forget to take the square root. So we take the square root of 61, and that would be approximately 7.5, 7.4, somewhere in there. Okay, then the next question, must A and B collinear? Remember, any 2 points are collinear, so that is a true statement. They must be collinear. Okay, and then AB equals BA, that is true because we're talking about length, and they do have the same length since they're the same line. And similarly, AB is congruent to BA because that's talking about size and shape, and those are the same. Now on number 8, remember here that we're talking about inductive, deductive. Inductive is simply cannot be proven, no facts, just using patterns, but no real scientific data. Deductive is very specific, definitions, proof, lots of support. And so deductive is where we have the concrete evidence. Inductive is where we're just going on patterns and things like that. Okay, number 9. Basically, the key on number 9 is we're looking for the remainder to tell us what day it is. So we know that if n is 523, 523 divided by 7 will give us 74 with the remainder of 5. And again, the remainder is what we're looking for. Now, if the remainder is 5, that says that we'll return home on Saturday, and it says here that he can only come back on Saturdays. So will he be able to return that day? Yes, he can, because it will put him on a Saturday. So then this question doesn't need to be answered. Okay? And then finally, number 10. Pay attention to the note. 0 is not a prime number. So it says n squared plus 1 is always a prime number. Well, when we plug the 1 in, 1 plus 1 is 2. That is prime. Plug 2 in, 2 squared 4 plus 1 is 5. That is prime. Plug the 4 in, 16 plus 1 is 17. That is also prime. When we plug the 0 in, 0 squared is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. 1 is not on the list, So it is our prime answer. So then that is the answer. All right, hope that helps. Don't forget your test is either Tuesday or Wednesday. If you need help, make sure you come to tutorials, but be ready for this test. You need to do good, make a good grade on it.